Hello there, you're watching the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. So a very good Friday evening to both of you.
Good evening.
Okay.
So let's take a look at the front pages first of all, shall we? And the Daily Telegraph says Downing Street is being urged to intervene in the escalating feud between the former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, and his successor, Nicola Sturgeon, whom he's accused of leadership failure. The Press and Journal carries the same story, saying Alex Salmond has demanded the resignations of a series of top Scottish Government and SNP officials. The Eye says police and teaching unions have criticised the decision to continue with the vaccine rollout on the basis of age rather than prioritising frontline workers. Don't wreck it now is the Express headline, with England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam warning the battle against COVID is not yet won and it's too early to relax. The Guardian leads with a declassified report by US intelligence services which says the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the murder of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. The Times says tens of thousands of young people will get their first step onto the housing ladder thanks to a new mortgage guarantee scheme that's due to be announced in the budget next week. Queen's as happy as Harry is the Mirror's headline after Prince Harry's interview on US television. And the Daily Star has its own unique take on the Duke of Sussex's bus tour of Los Angeles with James Corden. And The Sun leads with its own exclusive interview with a former contestant from the reality television show The Apprentice. So, Susie Boniface and Tim Montgomerie are here with me tonight, and lots of different headlines around, actually, different papers covering different stories. But you've picked two that do go with the same thing, and that was the evidence being given today in Scotland by Alex Salmond. The Daily Telegraph is the first paper you've picked out. Salmond denounces Sturgeon. Scotland's leadership has failed. Susie.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of Westminster bubble type gossip and coverage of this in the papers about what this means for the union and what it means for the Conservatives or the Labour Party and things like that. But at the root of all this, there are 10 women who made allegations about Alex Salmond, who we know were badly let down by the investigation that was held initially by the Scottish authorities, and who, when it went to court, there were 13 charges, 12 of them he was acquitted and one of them was found to be not proven. And they have said, while watching all this now unfold as he is trying to, point the finger of blame at someone for what's happened, that watching all this is more traumatic for them than the actual initial court case was. And Mr. Salmond, while he's not guilty of any crimes, has admitted behaving inappropriately with these women. And he's now trying to rehabilitate his reputation after these court troubles he's had, by attacking a woman, albeit politically. It's not very pleasant to watch.
Well, yes, I mean, he was cleared of 13 charges of sexual assault. The government there has admitted it acted unlawfully during its investigation into the initial complaints. What's your reaction to all of this, Tim? And, I mean, there were 6 hours of testimony today, weren't there? This is the Scottish Parliamentary Inquiry examining the Scottish Government's botched handling of the harassment allegations. What do you make of it?
Well, I have a lot of sympathy with what Susie has just said. That there was obviously misconduct from Alex Salmond in how he treated women, and we should not forget that. But as you say, Anna, the Scottish Government has admitted it acted unlawfully. It had to pay a huge amount of costs to Alex Salmond. Scottish taxpayers had to pay those costs because of the mishandling of this whole affair by the Scottish Government. So it's quite right that this is investigated. And what we have seen throughout this saga is an unwillingness, a lack of cooperation from Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government and civil servants acting on their behalf to the parliamentary inquiry, to newspapers. The Spectator had to go to the High Court this last week in order to get important documents given to, into the public domain. There seems to be a stench of cover-up in how Nicola Sturgeon has been handling this. And it just seems to be such a contrast with how she wants to present herself to the electorate on COVID, where she's been doing her daily press conferences. On this whole affair, she does seem to be vulnerable to the charge that Alex Salmond is making, that she did seem more than interested in that he was prosecuted for this and perhaps got rid of a rival forever. And it's ugly. But the complicity of the Scottish civil servants in this, the idea that they've grown too close to the SNP, that matters, because we need an independent civil service to stop politicians running amok.
This story also makes the front of the P&J, as you might imagine. On the subject of Nicola Sturgeon, she, of course, will be answering questions. And she does say she denies breaking the ministerial code. She's talked about Alex Salmond creating wild conspiracy theories that are untrue, and says there's not a shred of evidence that there's any conspiracy. The question as well, I guess, Susie, is to what extent this could filter through. There are the Holyrood elections coming up in May. What do you think voters will make of this? Will they see a division as being a problem, or do you think it will make no difference to how they view the party?
I think people that have been talking about that today are more Westminster bubble stuff, really, because your average voter assumes that politicians scheme against each other all the time. And if Nicola Sturgeon is found to have done that, and if she doesn't have to lose her job over it, over misleading Parliament or something, I can't see that voters are going to be sufficiently bothered in sufficient numbers to learn that she decided to knife her predecessor in that way. And she's a very clever woman. I very much doubt she's done anything that will get her in serious trouble. And this is, of course, as well, this is just Salmond's opening salvo. She's got to give her defence next week. But I don't think, despite what political commentators like to think about this kind of thing, how terribly important it must be, and the Conservatives are desperate to find a way to get rid of Sturgeon because it would make Boris Johnson's job as Minister of the Union, which he's handling very badly, a lot easier. I don't think most voters are going to care.
I'm going to move this on, if that's all right, Tim, unless you want to come back on that. Only just yeah, go on, very quickly.
Very quickly, I largely agree with what Susie says, but I think the Scottish voters are interested in the failure of the Scottish government on drugs and education policy, etc. And if they start to connect the idea that Nicola Sturgeon's been playing political games when she should have been focusing on her day job, then it does become an issue.
OK, so let's move on, only because I want to get through a few more stories if I can. The front page of the Eye, Susie, over 40s to get vaccine in April. And this was the decision by the body that advises the government on the prioritising of jabs. They're putting age before profession in the next stage.
Yeah, they decided that age is the dominant factor in COVID deaths, and it's easier and quicker to roll things out according to age than it is to roll it out according to risk. And I think everyone can appreciate that someone who is of extreme old age is obviously at more risk than anything else. If you're in your 90s or 80s or 70s, it's fair enough that you get vaccinated. But we're in a situation at the moment where there are 60-somethings who haven't been vaccinated and 30-somethings who are getting invited for a jab, who aren't frontline workers. And once you get into the working generation, you get into different kinds of risk. I am at far less risk working here in this desk as a 40-something than, a 30-something who is teaching children. She may have not very much risk as far as the death from COVID is concerned. But if you're going to be working with people who are walking disease vectors, whether you're a police officer or a prison officer or a shop worker or a teacher, you're at far more risk than a 40-something white-collar professional. And I don't see that it's really fair. It may be slower to roll it out by profession, by job, but I think it would be fairer.
Well, that was the argument, wasn't it? Today's news conference, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, said it was more important to be in a queue moving quickly than worrying about your position in the queue. What's your take on it, Tim?
I think we have to on this issue. I have a lot of sympathy for teachers, and the police have been protesting today, talking about how they are often in the front line, they get spat at by people, and they're very anxious about their security. And COVID world. But if we start to sort of give a priority to frontline groups, that should also include supermarket workers. It should include a whole range of other people who are in the front line. And that does start to deny access to the vaccine quickly for more vulnerable age groups. And so it's a very difficult situation. We, of course, all want everyone to have the vaccine as quickly as possible. But the government has given this decision to medical experts, and the medical experts who are study how to best deliver a vaccine think this is the best way forward. And so I think that although it's a difficult decision, I'm going to respect the process that the government has carried out.
OK.
Unfortunately, Tim, until last week, the experts said that those with mild and moderate learning disabilities didn't need the vaccine, and now they do. So they changed their minds.
OK.
Yeah, but it's for them to change their mind, perhaps not politicians.
We really are taking a break now. Do stay with us, though. Lots to talk about in just a moment, including we're going to be talking about the Fresh Prince of Hot Air. That's how the Daily Star calls Prince Harry. They're saying more publicity for publicity-shy bloke. Too harsh? We'll be talking about that in a moment.
Just that first lockdown and having the kind of the first few days of it or the first few weeks of it and being kind of rudderless and trying to work out where you're how to deal with it, basically. And I suppose as a kind of creative person or a writer, you sort of have that added thing of trying to work out what you should be doing, what you should be writing. And I had other projects that I was trying to do and difficult to concentrate on. Then in the evenings, I'd write stuff about lockdown. And that was kind of, obviously much more sort of therapeutic and enjoyable. So I kind of cleared the decks and tried to get rid of everything else, and then just went, to be fair, quite deep state and just wrote about the lockdown from inside the lockdown. The first kind of part of writing the book was just sort of documenting stuff that had happened during the lockdown and during the pandemic. But then I started writing conversations and kind of jotting down the conversations I was having, which is the other strand of the book. And so, there's something about when I've reread the book now with a bit of space behind it, there's something about the poems just kind of, setting out what happened in the lockdown and what was going on in March, April, May, June of last year. And then meanwhile, yes, a deterioration of my own sort of well-being. I mean, my sort of personal lockdown was, everyone has their kind of story or where they fit in. Mine was living on my own in a flat in lockdown. So it was kind of, I was sort of, ramping it up a bit, but a guy kind of trying to stay sane during lockdown is kind of the way that the story goes. And certainly in the story, I completely fall apart. In real life, ironically, I didn't fall apart because I was writing the story. I think that was what was happening. But with a bit more distance, I'll probably work out slightly more what was going on. The parks got full. The government waved through a new policy, stacking. Now groups were allowed to assemble on top of one another. Up to 5 groups of 10 could stack like this. Park wardens enforced a strict 2-metre gap in between the stacks. Joggers weaved between the stacks and sometimes clambered over them. They'd rest on top of the revellers and drink cider before scrambling back down and jogging on once more, snorting, panting, slaloming between these government-sanctioned piles of irrepressible humanity.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me tonight, the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Conservative commentator Tim Montgomerie. Welcome back to both of you. And Susie, your paper, the Daily Mirror, has put Prince Harry on its front page after he's done an interview with the chat show host James Corden in LA, hasn't he? They're saying Queen's as happy as Harry. So what's the story behind that headline?
Yeah, they've seemed to have spoken to someone who says that Harry and the Queen have been having private phone calls, obviously, as you would do, to grandmother and grandson, and that she's happy that he's happy, if you like, which is what any grandmother would say. And it's not particularly surprising because they're people and it's a family at the end of the day. But it kind of shows, I think, that it's the fact that we asked this particular family of people to be more than just people. We asked them to be symbols. And when you are a symbol, it's impossible to do all the normal things that normal people do. You can't have an opinion, even if you do good work. If you make a speech, it has to be checked. And those are the things that Harry and Meghan and other members of the royal family as well, to be fair, struggled with so much, that being a symbol was something that they just found too difficult. And he's fortunate in being the second son and that he was able to step away. Prince William wanted to, probably quite a few times in his life, and wasn't able to because of his position. And, you know, it's nice to know that there is still some normal human family behaviour going on there, because we tend to just treat them as a soap opera. But this is, you know, we ask a group of people to act as symbols, and it's always going to cause misery and unhappiness.
Well, yes, and clearly Prince Harry, in this interview with James Corden, still very upset about the press, doesn't like them at all. He wouldn't like the Daily Star's front page, would he, Tim? They're calling him the fresh prince of hot air and implying that he's being hypocritical because he's carrying out this interview where he talks about quite personal things. They say more publicity for publicity-shy bloke. Is that a fair criticism, or should he be allowed to just control what's in the public domain and what isn't?
I do, I'm afraid, think there's a bit of them wanting their cake and eating it. You know, I wish them nothing but happiness. I hope they find joy in their private lives. But, you know, this idea that they are constantly complaining about the way the media treat them, and then they seem to be courting media opportunities on a grand scale and, you know, going down a future whereby with contracts with Netflix and I think Audible, trying to, you know, really take advantage of their celebrity royal status to earn money and to be in that public world, which, of course, is where Meghan came from. They do seem to be contradicting their own complaint, really.
OK, something that I'm sure we'll return to and discuss at length another time, but we're out of time for now. Susie and Tim, thank you. I'll see you again at 11:30.